one of the greatest disciples of the Buddha, Venerable Ānanda. He was a unique person in many ways. He was the personal attendant of the Buddha for 25 years, which means that he was the person who was living in closest association together with the Buddha. He was also the disciple of the Buddha, foremost in mindfulness and memory, and also the disciple who had heard and memorized more discourses of the Buddha than anyone else. And because of that, he became the Dhamma treasurer, or the guardian of the Dhamma, who preserved the teaching of the Buddha for us. Also, if you read the suttas, then the three persons who appear most frequently are obviously the Buddha, and then Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Ānanda. So it's good to have some background knowledge about them, because one encounters them frequently. And yeah, it's a nice way of recollecting the Sangha, recollecting the amazing qualities of great disciples. And Ānanda means joy or delight. It was a very common name in India at the time of the Buddha. Usually, if a child gets born, that the parents are joyful and happy, and then they call it Ānanda or Ānanda, which means delight or joy. So it happened as well as with Venerable Ānanda. He also was a close relative of the Buddha, one of his cousins. The father of the Buddha, King Suddhodana, had a brother, and he had 3 sons, Anuruddha, Ānanda, and Mahanama. Anuruddha. Anuruddha, yeah.
So Anuruddha and Ānanda are direct brothers.
They were direct brothers, yeah, at least as far as one knows, yeah. 3, yeah. So yeah, a few years after the Buddha's awakening, then when the Buddha had visited his hometown, Kapilavatthu, many Sakyans, people of the clan of the Buddha, they decided to ordain and become monks. So yeah, it's also mentioned that Mahanama, it's mentioned that when Anuruddha grew up in luxury, similar like the Buddha himself, so with 3 palaces and being well looked after. So yeah, and so a few years after the Buddha's awakening, then various Sakyans had already ordained. And so then at that time, Mahanama thinks already all these people ordained from our clan, so maybe someone from our family should also become a monk. So maybe I or Anuruddha should ordain. So he goes to Venerable Anuruddha and suggests that either he ordains or Anuruddha. Then the Anuruddha is first not inclined to become a monk, and he says he grew up in lots of luxury, and so is not capable of leading the holy life, because then you would live very simply, just in the forest, just wearing some simple robes and so on. But then Mahanama, his brother, says, okay, then if you don't want to ordain, then I introduce you in the duties of the household life. He describes what he has to do as householder. And he says, at the beginning you have to plow the fields, and then afterwards you have to sow the seeds, then you have to irrigate the water, channel the water to the fields, and then you have to channel the water away later, and then you have to do weeding, and then you have to harvest the crop, and so on. And this goes on every year and year after year. And then Anuruddha realizes the pointlessness of this whole process. Even just hearing it, he already finds it's actually inducing some sense of disenchantment in him. And So he says, this work, this activity never stops. When will this work finally be finished? When will we be able to just enjoy ourselves? And then his brother says, but this work never stops, it never comes to an end. And even our fathers and grandfathers, they died, and this work never stops. They always continues to sow and plow and harvest and so on. And then Anuruddha says, it looks like you already know about the household life, so maybe I ordain better. And so Anuruddha then goes to his mother and requests permission to go forth into homelessness instead of becoming a monk. But the mother says, you are very dear to us, and even if you would die, we wouldn't want to be separated from you. So how could we allow you to go forth when you're still alive? So she's unhappy and doesn't want to give permission. And then after he sort of requests further another 2 times, then the mother thinks his friend Bhadia is the king of the Sakyans, and he will not be able to go forth into homelessness to become a monk. So I just tell my son Anuruddha, if Bhadio the Sakyan goes forth into homelessness, then you can go as well. And so Anuruddha goes to his friend Bhadio, who is the ruler of the Sakyans. At that time, maybe the father of the Buddha had already retired from his position as king, it seems. And so Anuruddha then tells Bhadio that he tells the mother that he wants to go forth into homelessness, but his going forth is dependent on that Bhadio goes forth. Yeah, so Anuruddha tells Bhadia that his going forth is dependent on that Bhadio goes forth. And then so Bhadio says, if that's the case, then may your going forth be independent from mine. I'm with you. And then he stops in mid-sentence because he's unsure whether he wants to ordain or not. And he says, just go forth according to your wish. And yes, then Bhadio says that he doesn't want to go forth, but he can just go forth according to his wish, Anuruddha, and to Anuruddha, and then Anuruddha says, my mother placed this condition on becoming a monk, and you said, I'm with you, so let's go forth together. And at that time, people were truthful and kept their word. So because he made this half-sentence statement that's not being sure, then Bhadio says, okay, then after 7 years, we can go forth into homelessness and become monks. And Anuruddha says, no, this is too long, I can't wait for 7 years. And okay, then he says, after 6 years. And so then gradually Anuruddha is bargaining him down to 7 days. And he says, yeah, okay, after 7 days in 7 days I will hand over my kingdom to my sons and brothers. And then after 7 days we will go forth together. Yeah, and the going forth of Bhadia and Anuruddha inspires then several other Sakyans to ordain. Bhagu, Kimbila, Devadatta, and also Ānanda, Anuruddha's brother. So they also Bhagu, he's not so famous in Kimbila. I think they often stay with Venerable Anuruddha together. Then at least appear in a few stories, but not that much. Exactly. He's just following them along. Exactly. Yeah. And so after the 7 days have passed, when the day of their going forth comes, the 6 Sakyan noble warriors ride out of Kapilavatthu, accompanied by a 4-foot army consisting of infantry, cavalry, war chariots, and war elephants. So they were noble warriors, and probably the soldiers are attached to their commanders or their rulers, so they give them a last paying respects, following them. And so you can imagine Ānanda and Anuruddha and the other Sakyans riding into homelessness on 6 war elephants in front of an army. It's a noble warrior way of going forth. And also one of their servants is following them. Maybe he was living together a long time with the Sakyans and felt a strong personal connection with them. And that's Upadi, their barber. And when they reach the border of the territory of the Sakyans, they send the army back, and they take off their expensive jewelry and clothing. They tie everything into a bundle, and they give it to their servants Upadi. So they just give away the last things, and they tell him, you can just take them, and that will be enough for your livelihood. So maybe he could have lived from that until the end of his life if he was a simple barber with all these expensive things that they had. And so Upadi is going back for some time to Kapilavatthu, but then he thinks, yeah, maybe if I come back, the Sakyans will think I was responsible for the going forth to get all this expensive jewelry, and the Sakyans are fierce. They might kill me. And so he just takes the bundle of jewelry and puts it onto a tree and thinks, may it belong to anyone who finds it, he can take it. And so he's catching up again with the Sakyans, and they ask him, why did you come back? And he tells them, and then they say, yeah, the Sakyans are fierce, they might have killed you, it's better that you come back. and so Upadi then thinks, yeah, if all this eminent Sakyans go forth, why should not I also go forth and become a monk? And so he joins them. And so the Sakyans take Upadi to the Buddha, and then they say, we Sakyans are proud people because they are from a high caste, from a clan with a long lineage, and they were very proud of their ancestry. And they tell the Buddha he should ordain Upadi first, and then they always have to pay respects to him and do all the duties for him because he's senior. And in this way, our Sakyan pride will be humbled. So they already had a sense that if they go forth into homelessness, they have to leave behind their previous clan and status, and it's about abandoning that. You can see they have already some understanding. Several of this group of monks realize outstanding attainments already during the first Vassa, the first year's monk. Padya the Sakyan, who was first reluctant to ordain, he already becomes an Arahant during the first Vassa already. So he attains complete liberation, and Venerable Anuruddha develops the divine eye, already develops some psychic powers. Devadatta also develops psychic powers during the first Vassa already. And Venerable Ānanda realizes stream entry. The Barber Upadi also becomes a very outstanding monk. He becomes the monk foremost in knowledge of the Vinaya, the monastic rules and discipline. And
because of those two, they got Vinaya.
yeah, exactly. They together. Yeah.
While he chanted that Vinaya was in the last council, first council.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he's then the Upadi is then later the monk who will recite the Vinaya Pitaka at the first council. And also if you wonder what happened to Mahanama, who stayed in lay life,
Who is still in the
he became one of the 10 greatest male lay disciples of the Buddha. So he also became a stream enterer.
So he was always a lay person.
He was always a lay person, yeah.
Many suttas he comes back to Buddha, right?
Exactly. Sometimes he visits the Buddha, asks him some questions. And yeah, so he also becomes a noble disciple of the Buddha, even though he remained in lay life. In the Samyutta Nikaya 2283, the Venerable Ānanda relates the occasion when he realized a stream entry as well. So he's a senior monk. Just find it. So Venerable Punna Mantaniputta was very helpful for him when he was newly ordained.
So he's the same person who comes and talks to Sariputta.
Yes, he's the one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he was also a great disciple of the Buddha, and he helped him by teaching him. And so he gives him the short teaching. He says, it is by clinging Ānanda that the notion I am occurs, not without clinging. So clinging upadana, which means sometimes translated as clinging, can also be translated as appropriating something or taking up something. And so by clinging or appropriating form, this conceiving I am occurs. Or by clinging to feeling and perception, volitional formation and consciousness, this notion I am occurs, and not without clinging. And he says it's just like a young man or woman who likes to be beautiful would look at her facial image in a mirror, and then this young man or woman would look at it with clinging, not without clinging. And then you have this impression, I'm this, you are this mirror image actually it's just an image, but you think that's what I am. And so similar, by clinging, by appropriating, then we take this mirror, we appropriate this mirror image, and then this notion of this is me, I look good or I look bad. And so in the same way we cling to the 5 khandhas, we appropriate them, and then this notion I am occurs. And I asked him further, what do you think, Ānanda, is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. And is what is impermanent, suffering or happiness? It is unsatisfactory. And is it appropriate to see this, what is impermanent and suffering and subject to change, as I am and myself? No, Venerable Sir. And then seeing thus the noble disciple, that's the noble disciple sees all form, feeling, and perception, volitional formations, and consciousness like this. This is not mine, I'm not this is not myself. And seeing it thus, he becomes disenchantment and dispassionate towards form, feeling, and perception, and the other khandhas, and his heart is liberated. And so when he hears this discourse, then he says, I made the breakthrough to the Dhamma. He became a stream enterer. Exactly. So that was his instruction with this simile of the clinging, like we see the mirror image as ourselves.
So this Punna Mantaniputta was instrumental, because he was the kind of a teacher of Ānanda at that time.
Yes, it seems, exactly, yeah.
Because in this particular sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, Buddha was praising
Yeah.
so he seems to be a very outstanding monk, right?
Yeah, just have a look. I think he was foremost in Dhamma teaching or instructing the monks. So just have a look if I can find the footnotes. Yeah, Punna Mantaniputta was the monk disciples' foremost speaker on the Dhamma. So quite a special person, obviously. He's been a good Dhamma teacher. Venerable Ānanda was outstanding in 5 qualities. So it's very unusual. Usually the great disciples only have one outstanding quality, or maximum two, while Venerable Ānanda had 5. He was foremost in having heard many discourses of the Buddha, and he was the disciple of the Buddha foremost in sati, mindfulness and memory. He was foremost in mastering the structure of the Dhamma, and foremost in being steadfast, probably in learning and in putting forth an effort. And he was the foremost personal attendant of the Buddha. Beyond so these 5 qualities made Venerable Ānanda the ideal person, become the guardian of the Dhamma, or alternative translation would be the Dhamma treasurer. And in the country, the treasurer is the responsible person for storing and preserving and distributing the national wealth. So if the treasurer is not so capable, then the income of the state will decline and it will go into bankruptcy. But if the treasurer is capable, then the wealth of the nation will be used wisely and of the nation will prosper. And so similar in the dispensation of the Buddha, the wealth is the Dhamma, and how long the Dhamma of the Buddha will last depends to a large extent how well it is preserved and transmitted. Yeah, this position of Venerable Ānanda's guardian of the Dhamma was of great importance. Ajahn Moneyyo says in a discourse that the Dhamma is like water, and just like water, it brings coolness and peace into the world, which is on fire and ablaze with desire, aversion and delusion. And once the teaching of the Buddha is disappeared, then the entire world will be ablaze with desire, aversion and delusion, and there will be nothing anymore to put it out. And because of that, someone who memorizes and preserves the Dhamma is called the eye of the entire world in Venerable Ānanda's verses. And so, because he preserves what is most precious in the world, the Dhamma. Yeah. Venerable Ānanda was the ideal person to be the guardian of the Dhamma, because as personal attendant of the Buddha, he was the person who heard more discourses of the Buddha than anyone else, because he was always following him and most of the time together with him and listening to what he said.
And also I heard that whatever he has not heard, Buddha has to tell him, right? Something like that.
Yes, it is a later story when he gets appointed as attendant of the Buddha. He has this request that he should repeat all discourses that he hasn't heard to him, so he can get to know them.
Because otherwise how he can tell all suttas.
Yeah. And the fact that Venerable Ānanda was the Buddha's disciple, foremost in mindfulness and memory, means that basically he was the person with the best memory in an entire eon, except for Buddha or another great disciple with the same quality. There would be no other person with a similar memory like Venerable Ānanda. To give some idea how much that would be, today there are still monks who are able to memorize the entire Tipitaka, so like the whole Vinaya Pitaka, the whole Sutta Pitaka, and the whole Abhidhamma Pitaka. It's called the Tipitaka Dara. You can do some exam in Burma apparently. And so in our library shelf, the Vinaya Pitaka and the Sutta Pitaka together in Pali is about like this much maybe. And this is without the repetitions, it's already abbreviated without repetitions. And so this is what a ordinary Tipitaka Dara can memorize. It's memorized. Of course, it would be only very little in comparison to Venerable Ānanda, what he is capable to memorize. So Venerable Ānanda says in his Theragatha verses, 82,000 Dhamma teachings I received from the Buddha and 2,000 from the monks, and thus 84,000 teachings were set in motion by me. So this 84,000 Dhamma teachings that he memorized. So it's a vast amount, much larger than a ordinary Tipitaka Dara, obviously. Yeah, so with this outstanding memory, it was easy for him to memorize all the discourses of the Buddha that he heard. And because of his mastery of the because of his mastery of the sequential structure of the Dhamma, it was easy for him to keep in mind the structure of each discourse and also to arrange the discourses in his memory. So it was easy to remember them. So he would have to arrange them somehow, to group them into some order for some regular recital, to repeat them in some interval. And so he himself describes this quality that he had very nicely here in Majjhima Nikaya 32. He says, here a monk has learned much, remembers what he has heard, and consolidates what he has learned. Such teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing, in which affirm a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. Such teachings he has learned much of, remembered, mastered verbally, investigated with the mind, and penetrated well by view. And he teaches the Dhamma to the four assemblies with well-rounded and coherent statements and phrases for the eradication of the underlying tendencies. So describing this quality of, it's called in Pali, it's called Bahusutto, which means literally one has heard much, but in the sense that one has heard much and then memorized it in terms of the teaching. In this case, this is just any monk can have this quality, but Venerable Ānanda was the great disciple foremost in this quality, so he was the best of all who have this quality. So obviously any monk can, or nun or lay disciple can aspire to have this quality of having learned much and memorized much of the Dhamma, but he would be the foremost of all disciples. As I said, Venerable Ānanda was also the foremost personal attendant of the Buddha. And during the early years of the Buddha's dispensation, different monks were the personal attendant of the Buddha. Some were quite skilled in being personal attendants, but some not so much. And you can see in some places in the suttas, in the Vinaya Pitaka, that some monks did the task in a way which was not ideal, and on some occasion even they were even disrespectful to the Buddha. Yeah, Megyo, he just, even the Buddha tells him he should stay, and then he just goes away. And then the Buddha says, what can I say? If you want to go in seclusion, then just go. Or another one is then even, like one, I don't know his name anymore, but they come to a crossroad, and the Buddha says, we go this way. And the attendant says, no, we go this way. And so he's arguing with the Buddha which way to go. And after the Buddha says 3 times, we go this way, the attendant, he just puts down the Buddha's bowl and robes, gives him to him, and just goes the other way. Yeah. And then he gets beaten up by robbers. So the Buddha knew that there were robbers, and he would just insist to go this way, and then he gets beaten up by these robbers and comes back. He comes back, yeah. It's a story, the Udada, but I don't remember the name now. Yeah, you can find it maybe if you like. Yeah, about 20 years after the awakening of the Buddha, then Venerable Ānanda became the personal attendant, and he did this task in the most excellent way. So Venerable Ānanda himself describes how he served the Buddha very nicely in his own verses. He says, "For 25 years I served the Blessed One with actions of loving kindness, like a shadow that never departs. For 25 years I served the Blessed One with speech of loving kindness, like a shadow that never departs. And for 25 years I served the Blessed One with mental actions of loving kindness, like a shadow that never departs." Yeah, serving the Buddha or noble disciple of the Buddha is called the unsurpassable service. The unsurpassable service. So the Buddha mentions it. He says, if someone attends or serves the Buddha or a great disciple of the Buddha, a noble disciple of the Buddha, this is called the unsurpassable service, which leads to the purification of beings. And this is for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the acquiring of the right method, and for the realization of Nibbana. This is called the unsurpassable service. So you associate with this person and care for this other person, and by that sort of growing the Dhamma, and that can lead to you embarking on the path to liberation and become more pure, because you associate with this noble disciple of the Buddha or with the Buddha himself. So this is a great effect, very powerful effect to be together with a person like that and serving this person.
I think he is, like Ānanda said, he was aspiring that for a long time, right? So many years before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least that's the story exactly from the Chartakas probably, and from yeah. Yeah, so in this way, Venerable Ānanda practiced the unsurpassable service for the Buddha, manifesting his loving kindness in actions, speech, and also in the mind, and looking after the Buddha. But being the personal attendant of the Buddha was also a challenging position, because this was the most eminent and public position in the entire monastic community, except if you were a chief disciple. So because of that, Venerable Ānanda had to deal with a great number of people, and so he was naturally the focus of much attention, and he was seen as a role model of a monk by the lay people and by the monastics who would meet the Buddha. Obviously, if you meet the Buddha, then you expect that the attendant monk has some impeccable behavior and is very pure. You would be not suitable that the Buddha has an attendant who is foolish or inexperienced, or that is just, the Buddha wouldn't want to live together with a person like that. So he has obviously have a monk by his side who is of great purity and of outstanding qualities. And so, being the faithful companion of the Buddha, who was always in his presence, he made a strong impression on people. How did Venerable Ānanda care for the Buddha, and what were his duties? Some things were more like simple tasks, like cleaning the meditation hut of the Buddha. Then in the morning, bringing him water for drinking and washing his face, preparing some toothwood for cleaning his mouth, preparing his bowl and his robes for alms rounds, and then before the alms round he would sort of line up together the Sangati and the Uttara Sangha, the two robes, and then putting it over the shoulders of the Buddha and closing the ties at the bottom. And then this description is from the duties that the junior monk does to the acharya, to the teacher. So obviously Venerable Ānanda would do the same duties that a junior monk does for the acharya. That would be the classic duties that a junior monk does for the senior monk who is his teacher, and so he would do exactly these things. This is from the Vinaya Pitaka, described like more or less most of the things that I say now. And then accompanying him on alms round, carrying his bowl, and then after the alms rounds, returning first to the to the monastery and putting out a seat, setting up his alms rounds, setting up his alms bowl, and then also receiving the robes of the Buddha again, putting them into the sun for a short time, and then folding them up, and then after eating, washing his bowl, putting it away, then sometimes washing the robes of the Buddha, dyeing them, sometimes also being a messenger for the Buddha. For example, sometimes the Buddha would send Venerable Ānanda as messenger to assemble the monks or make an announcement. Then in the afternoon or early evening, some people would come to meet the Buddha, to talk with him, either amongst the nuns or kings or ministers or some teachers of other religions or Brahmins or general people. And so this was an important task of Venerable Ānanda, to give people the opportunity to talk with the Buddha and hear the Dhamma, but then also to do it in a way which is not inconvenient for the Buddha, the people not just turn up at any time, which is inconvenient for him. Sometimes also Venerable Ānanda would notice that a monk is sick, and then he would actively ask the Buddha to visit him out of compassion, so he would even help and sort of try to give people an opportunity to hear the Dhamma from the Buddha. Or sometimes monks would want to have some Dhamma discussion with the Buddha, and then Venerable Ānanda would know the daily schedule, where would the Buddha go in the evening or in the morning, and then he just tells the monks, so that they naturally meet and can have some Dhamma discussion. It just happens naturally, they just meet each other and then they can engage in conversation. You can see in some suttas. And yes, obviously the Buddha wouldn't want to hinder anyone of hearing the Dhamma. He also had immeasurable compassion. And so Venerable Ānanda and the Buddha working together harmoniously, so that as many people as possible can listen to the Dhamma and meet the Buddha, have this unique opportunity. Also, Venerable Ānanda would care for the Buddha when he was sick and get medicine for him several times. Sometimes also the Buddha asks Venerable Ānanda to give a Dhamma talk instead of him. For example, yes, exactly. Yeah. I think I'm not sure, but I think once it happened sometimes for Venerable Ānanda and sometimes for Venerable Sariputta, that he asks him to give a Dhamma talk instead of him. Yeah. But one can also see from the suttas that Venerable Ānanda was not always engaged with being the personal attendant of the Buddha. Sometimes he would go to the Buddha and ask him for a short instruction that he can meditate on his own. And then he would just live secluded and stay on his own. And sometimes the Buddha would go away and be without attendant, or just be alone, and then only Venerable Ānanda would bring him food and no one else would come to the Buddha. Being in the presence of the Buddha had a powerful effect on the mind of Venerable Ānanda. In his Therigatha verses, he says that for 25 years he had no perceptions of sensuality or aversion in his mind, even though he was only a stream enterer. Because he was so close to the most powerful spiritual being in the universe and completely devoted to take care for him, then these defilements didn't have any room to arise. So he was just so focused on the Buddha and so close to him. This as well, yeah, exactly, yeah, definitely, yeah. Also, I think his main remaining defilements were more like personal attachment or social attachments with Venerable Sariputta, for example, his friends, or with the Buddha himself, exactly.
Sariputta also Ānanda.
Yeah, so.
When he passed away, he was very sad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, both of them. Yeah. And maybe you also noticed a similar effect when you were in the presence of some person who has maybe some realization of the Dhamma on a high level. Then it wouldn't occur to you to have any unwholesome thoughts or do anything wrong because you're in the presence of this very pure and peaceful being. And it just has this very peaceful presence, and you become similar naturally. Venerable Ānanda was a person who was liked by people and very popular. He didn't have any enemies, even though he had this prominent position in the Sangha, which is quite unusual because even some arahants, they had to face some aggression from people, or people were plotting against them, or even trying to kill them or killing them. So one can see that it was a very special quality of Venerable Ānanda. And the Buddha even compares the popularity of Venerable Ānanda with the popularity of a wheel-turning emperor, a Chakravarti. So he says, if people see Venerable Ānanda, they are happy to see him. And then if he talks about the Dhamma, they are happy to listen. And then when he stops talking, they are disappointed. They still want to hear more of what he's teaching. And so it just seems to be a person everyone likes to see and think, this is this great person and so wonderful. Well, then with other arahants, even with some great arahants, they actually, maybe some people were not inspired by this. He was just somehow just some joyful person, just a person where others are joyful to see him. And that's like his name indicates. So also in contrast to his brother, Venerable Anuruddha, he had a quite different character. Venerable Anuruddha, he was mostly dwelling in seclusion and didn't have much involvement with the monastic community. And so you see the different brothers. The Venerable Anuruddha just being quiet in a secluded place, far away from society, while Venerable Ānanda was so much engaged, taking care of the Buddha and helping the Buddha to manage the Sangha with Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana. If you want to see the close relationship between the Buddha and Venerable Ānanda, a nice sutta to read is the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, Digha Nikaya 16. You can see how the Buddha, you can see how Venerable Ānanda is caring for the Buddha during the last year of his life. So the sutta is a special mood, the mood of parting, and so it's naturally especially painful for Venerable Ānanda. Because of his closeness to the Buddha, he also built up some strong affection for the Buddha, and then he experiences strong grief when the Buddha gets sick and passes away. He feels very strongly affected. At that time, in the same year, first the chief disciples pass away, Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana. And everyone can see that probably Venerable Sariputta was Venerable Ānanda's best friend. And so when he enters final Nibbana, then Venerable Ānanda is very strongly affected. It's described in Sutta Nikaya 47:13. And also, exactly, the novice Chunda comes to tell the Buddha. Exactly, he's Venerable Sariputta's younger brother. And so Chunda, Venerable Sariputta is staying at his hometown, Nalanda, and he gets sick, and then Venerable Chunda, his younger brother, is his personal attendant, but then Venerable Sariputta passes away, and so then Venerable Chunda takes Venerable Sariputta's golden robe and is wandering to Savatthi to tell the Buddha about the passing away of the chief disciple. And then later Venerable Ānanda says, when he heard that Venerable Sariputta has attained final Nibbana, then it seems that his body was as if drugged, and he became disoriented, and the Dhamma was not clear to him anymore. And then the Buddha says, but why, Ānanda, when Sariputta attained final Nibbana, did it take away your virtue and pass away? Or did it take away your samadhi? Did it take away your wisdom? Or did it take away your liberation, your knowledge and vision of liberation? And then Venerable Ānanda says, no, he did not take them away. But for me, Venerable Sariputta was an advisor and counselor, one who instructed, exhorted, inspired and gladdened me. He was unwearyingly in teaching the Dhamma. He was helpful to his brothers in the holy life. We recollect the nourishment of Dhamma, the wealth of Dhamma, the help of Dhamma given by Venerable Sariputta. So there's great inspiration of Venerable Sariputta, and then he's very, very sad that he passes away. So, yeah, then in his Therigatha verses, Venerable Ānanda says then, regarding to passing away of Venerable Sariputta, all directions are obscure, the teachings are not clear to me. My noble friend is gone. It seems like darkness to me. So it's very sad. This is in the Therigatha verses. And yeah, so then later in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, one can read how Venerable Ānanda is caring for his master, the Buddha, during the last year of his life, up to the final hour. And yeah, so that then at the end the Buddha is already quite weak, and Venerable Ānanda is bringing him some water to drink and folding up his sangati, his robe, that he can lie down, and because he's tired, and taking care for him. And then at some time the Buddha describes in detail how his body should be cremated and how a stupa should be erected for his relics. And then this is too much for Venerable Ānanda. He's overcome by grief and goes back to his own lodging and is crying. And so he's just overwhelmed by it. And he says, I'm still someone in training who has much to practice, and the teacher is passing away who was so compassionate to me. And the Buddha notices that Venerable Ānanda is somewhere else and sends a monk to get him. And then he's teaching him, and he says, enough, Ānanda, don't weep and lament. Have I not already told you that all things that are pleasing and delightful are changeable, subject to separation and becoming otherwise? How could it be possible, Ānanda, since whatever is born, become, compounded, is subject to decay? How could it be that it should not pass away? For a long time, Ānanda, you have been in the Tathagata's presence, showing loving kindness in acts of body, speech and mind. Beneficially, blessedly, wholeheartedly, you have achieved much merit, Ānanda. Make an effort, and in short time you will be free from the asavas, from all defilements. So he's encouraging him to practice on and reminding him of all the good things that he has done during 25 years. And then he encourages him further, and he says, all those who were perfectly awakened ones in the past had such a foremost attendant like I, Venerable Ānanda, and all those perfectly awakened ones in the future will also have such an excellent foremost attendant like Venerable Ānanda. And yeah, that he also praises him for how wise he is, and he knows exactly what is the right time for monks or nuns to come to him, and for lay people, and for any other people wanting to visit him. And yeah, he says he has 4 remarkable qualities. If a company of monks or nuns or female or male lay disciples see Ānanda, they are pleased when they see him. And when Ānanda is talking the Dhamma, then they are pleased. And when he's silent, they are disappointed. So just how much everyone is loving him. So he seems to be a very social person who gets along well with people, but then also being attached to people at the same time as well, and then experiencing the suffering of this attachment for the Buddha and his friend. And so then at the final Nibbana of the Buddha, his brother, Venerable Anuruddha, is speaking an inspiring verse about the peace of final Nibbana, while for Venerable Ānanda it's probably the darkest hour of his life when the Buddha passes away, and he expresses his feelings with this verse. He says, "Then there was terror and our hair was standing on end when the all-accomplished one, the perfectly enlightened one, attained final Nibbana." So he saw just this great shock of the Buddha passing away. Yeah, very different. And so even though Venerable Ānanda knew already since 3 months that the Buddha would pass away, the Buddha announced his final Nibbana, so he knew he would pass away. It wasn't surprising. And he was still so strongly affected. And the rest of the nights, or the next night, the night after the final Nibbana of the Buddha, then Venerable Anuruddha is consoling his brother, Venerable Ānanda, by talking with him about the Dhamma. So he tries to encourage him to, that he becomes free from his sadness, and reminds him of his understanding of what the peace of final Nibbana is, and it is something uplifting and inspiring.
He was talking about that cause and effect, right? He said he's passed away or something, but Anuruddha said he's in that process of jhanas and coming back.
That was before. So before the final Nibbana, then the Buddha enters the 4 jhanas and these 4 formless attainments and the cessation of perception and feeling. And then Venerable Ānanda, who is very close to the Buddha, thinks he has already passed away. But then Venerable Anuruddha, who is the divine eye, tells him, no, he has not passed away, he's just entered the cessation of perception and feeling. And then he goes backwards to the stages, and then entering the 4th jhana, and then while coming out of the 4th jhana, he passes away. Probably it's very peaceful, because then the bodily sankharas are completely stilled in 4th jhana, and so
he's not experiencing that pain anymore, all this with the food and everything.
Yeah. It's just the body is completely still and there's no more breathing. Even so, you pass away without even breathing. The in and out breath has already stopped, and so there's no agitation in the body anymore. But the body is just completely peaceful, and so then comes the final Nibbana, and then the earth is quaking and thunder, and this is just when the sun is rising. It's at the end of the night, last watch of the night. So the sun is just sort of rising, and then the Buddha passes away at sunrise, probably. And so then he's speaking these verses, expressing his sadness.
We are so lucky it is recorded so clearly.
So much detail,
Really detailed. So even for that also we should be thankful to Ānanda for.
Yeah, of course, It's also because of him, definitely.
I think it is the longest sutta in the
This is the longest sutta in the whole Sutta Pitaka, exactly. After the body of the Buddha has been cremated, then the first 8 relic stupas get erected, and 1 stupa for the urn and 1 stupa for the ashes. So 10 stupas. But then, still Venerable Ānanda was sad and experiences some grief, and he expresses his mood in these verses. My friend Venerable Sariputta has passed away. My teacher too is gone. Now there is no friendship like this, mindfulness of the body. The old ones have passed away now. The new ones don't please me much. Today I meditate all alone, like a bird gone to its nest in the rain. So it sounds very sad or lonely. Then meanwhile, Venerable Markasapa, he's the most senior monk and the greatest disciple of the Buddha still alive. He's initiating the first council to recite and preserve the Dhamma and Vinaya for future generations. And so the monks invite Venerable Markasapa, as senior monk, most eminent monk, to select the participants of the first council. And so Venerable Markasapa is selecting 500 arahants minus one. And then the other monks say, Venerable Ānanda is not an arahant, but he has learned much of the teaching, and it would be good if he would also choose Venerable Ānanda. And then Venerable Markasapa also chooses Venerable Ānanda to participate in the council. But with this gesture of selecting only 499 arahants and leaving this empty space, he is already indicating that it is not acceptable for Venerable Ānanda to participate in the council as one in training, but he has to become an arahant and realize complete liberation before that. So he's putting some pressure on Venerable Ānanda to encourage him to practice for liberation in this short time. And so as attendant of the Buddha, Venerable Ānanda was known by many people, monastics and lay people. And after the final Nibbana of the Buddha and the two chief disciples, obviously many people would seek him out to console them from the passing away and for some Dhamma instructions. But that obviously was a distraction of Venerable Ānanda, because therefore realizing complete liberation in the few months left until the first council was not much time left. And so he would have to put forth a lot of effort. And I would say the first council was the most important event in Buddhist history after the Buddha's final Nibbana. And without it, the Dhamma Vinaya would have probably already disappeared, and or it would have just mutated into something which you can't recognize anymore. It wouldn't be recognized anymore. What is actually this teaching?
It will not be clear and vague, it will be corrupted.
Yeah.
All these things.
Then so it makes sense that Venerable Ānanda so Venerable Markasapa makes sure that all conditions are in place for the first Buddhist council to be successful, because then everything else will be based on that.
Yeah.
What happens there? This will be sort of the foundation for the continuation of the dispensation of the Buddha.
People cannot change it, right? Because it's so clear.
Yeah.
So otherwise people can corrupt it.
Yeah, and Venerable Ānanda is one of the two most important monks participating in the council, because he is the monk who is reciting the discourses of the Buddha, and has memorized most Dhamma of all monks. Yeah, and so as one of the two most important monks of the council, Venerable Ānanda should have the reliability of an arahant. And in addition, Venerable Markasapa was already over 80 years old at the time of the first council, maybe even 90 years already.
Ānanda was 80, right? Ānanda was 80.
I don't think so.
Ānanda was younger to Buddha.
I mean, there is this later commentary story that Venerable Ānanda would be the same age of the Buddha, but it doesn't look likely. If you imagine an 80-year-old person caring for another 80-year-old person, I think rather maybe he was 20 years younger, maybe he was something like 60, and Ānanda, the Buddha was maybe 80, something like that at that time. I think it makes it more believable.
That means when he is actually ordained, he should be 15 then.
He ordains only a few years after the Buddha's awakening.
Yeah.
So
Buddha was 35 already.
at that time already older, maybe even already 40. So maybe at that time it would be easy that he would be just 20, or maybe 20 a few months older, something like that. Also because Venerable Markasapa is addressing me as a youngster, and Venerable Ānanda is saying then, now already some gray hairs growing on the head. So if he's 80, it doesn't make sense, the statements. If you're 80, your hair is gray already completely. It wouldn't really, it doesn't fit together with this theory that's, or this belief that he was the same age of the Buddha.
That he lived up to 120 years.
Yes, in this commentaries then later it's mentioned that he's getting so old. But from these statements, I think it's more likely that he was considerably younger than the Buddha and Venerable Markasapa as well. So Venerable Markasapa is already over 80 years old, probably at the time of the first Buddhist council, maybe even 90. And then after Venerable Markasapa would pass away, then Venerable Ānanda will be the most eminent senior monk in the whole Sangha. So it's important that the Sangha has an Arahant, a senior monk, to guide them after Venerable Markasapa has passed away. And for this reason, Venerable Markasapa is actively correcting and teaching Venerable Ānanda to keep him on track to realize the highest goal before the first council, rather than getting involved with responsibilities and teaching. And also even the Devas are stirring up Venerable Ānanda to be diligent. There's a little sutta here in the Samyutta Nikaya. On one occasion, the Venerable Ānanda was dwelling among the Kosalans in a certain woodland thicket. And on that occasion, Venerable Ānanda was excessively involved instructing lay people. And then a Devata that was living in this woodland thicket has compassion for Venerable Ānanda and is stirring up a sense of urgency in him and approaching him and addressing him in these verses. Having entered the thicket at the foot of a tree, having placed Nibbana in your heart, meditate, Gotama, and don't be negligent. What will this hula-bulu do for you? Don't get involved in this lots of activity, but just meditate. Yes. So Venerable Ānanda is practicing diligently. Then the night before the council is coming, so he's spending most of the night developing mindfulness of the body. And then the night is almost over already. And just a few hours before the first council, then we start next morning. And so he thinks he's at least lying down for a short time to take some rest before the first council starts. And then so he's lying down mindfully and clearly comprehending. And then at the time between sitting posture and lying down posture, his heart gets liberated from all defilements. And so just when he's in the process of lying down, probably just somehow becoming peaceful and silent after all his efforts, and then he abandons everything.
Somebody says, when before the head touches the pillow.
Yes.
Before the head touches the pillow.
Yeah.
To become Arahant.
And so then at the first council, he's reciting for 2 months, reciting the 5 Nikayas. Probably it was only part of the time, because the Vinaya Pitaka would be Venerable Upali who was reciting it, so it would be part of the time. I know actually it says during the first month of the Vasa they spend repairing the lodgings. So they gather, the Markasapa makes the suggestion that they should hold the first council in Rajagaha because there are lots of support. And then he thinks the Buddha praised it to repair the lodgings. And so the 500 Arahants repair the lodgings in the different monasteries in Rajagaha. So they spent the first time repairing the lodgings, and then after that, the first council takes place.
Okay, so it is
Seems
the second one.
exactly in the second month it starts, as far as I remember. Yeah. So this it's then the other 2 months of the Vassa, probably. That's at least my understanding. Yeah. Yeah, so you can imagine Venerable Ānanda reciting each of the 5 Nikayas of the Sutta Pitaka for about 2 months, and afterwards then groups of 100 arahants specializing in memorizing one of the Nikayas, and 100 arahants specializing in memorizing the Vinaya Pitaka. Yeah, often people think that the task of the first Buddhist council was somehow trying to remember what the Buddha was teaching, but this is not correct. The discourses of the Buddha were already memorized and recited and repeated for 45 years before the Buddha passed away. So already during the time of the Buddha, monks would specialize to memorize the Dhamma and the Vinaya. And the question of the first council was mainly how much of all these teachings which have been memorized well should be included, and also, and what of all these teachings should be included, and how can it be preserved so that it's possible for an average monk to memorize it, who is not a great arahant. Obviously, in the future generations, they would have to take in account that also just an average person has to memorize this, and that it's easy for an average person to memorize it. Yeah. And so the Sutta Pitaka is the greatest masterpiece of Venerable Ānanda. And you can see the whole structure of the Sutta Pitaka is perfectly made to be memorized in terms of how the syllables in Pali, and then the sentences and paragraphs, and the structure of the suttas, the whole way it is arranged is all perfectly made to be memorized. And so most people, when they read the suttas today, they just complain there are all these repetitions and so on, but it's just a form of oral literature, so it was made to be memorized, not like a book how we would write it today. So it has this advantage. If you use it like it was intended, then you can really see what the benefit of it actually is, and how easy it is to memorize like a 50-minute discourse, and it just like gets cemented into the memory, and it's just like perfectly made for that. And yeah, you can think about it. If you imagine 500 arahants coming together to create something to preserve the teaching of the Buddha for future generations, using all their abilities and powers, they obviously make something very special and unique. And so, it's something very special. After the first council was successfully completed, then Venerable Ānanda lived for another 40 years, according to the commentaries. And he became then the longest living great disciple of the Buddha after the final Nibbana. So he was a very important monk, obviously. Then after the Buddha passed away, he was more or less the most eminent monk. Then after Venerable Mahakassapa passed away. Yeah, so the Buddha says that just like the great ocean contains many jewels and precious substances, like pearls and gold and silver and so on, he says in the same way, this Dhamma and Vinaya contains many jewels and precious things. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, and the 4 right efforts, and the 4 bases of spiritual power, and the 5 faculties, and the 5 powers, the 7 enlightenment factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. And so that we have these countless Dhamma treasures in the Sutta Pitaka, this we owe to Venerable Ānanda, the great treasurer of the Dhamma. So he collected all these treasures for us, and now we have them still available. Yeah, so this is just a few more sentences. Was one of the great disciples of the Buddha, the disciple with the greatest Dhamma knowledge. Obviously, it had a very stabilizing effect and influence on the Sangha. And so 100 years after the final Nibbana of the Buddha, at the second council, the most senior monk who led the second council was still a personal disciple of Venerable Ānanda.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And so a few most senior monks were still personal disciples of Venerable Ānanda and lived together with him.
oh.
Yeah.
100 years after.
Yeah.
That is at time of Kanishka?
I think that was time of Kanishka was later.
Kanishka
That this king was much later than
So what is Ashoka? Ashoka is third or
Asoka was the third council, and then Kanishka was much later than King Asoka.
after Ashoka?
Yeah.
So this is 100 years. Who conducted that? Some king?
Do you mean Kanishka? Or I don't know that much about this time. He built some large stupas, but it's
So that is the second council.
this was after King Ashoka's time.
No, the one you are talking is the second council. After the
Second council, I don't know what king that was anymore. I don't have a
he was Ananda's attendant was there.
like a disciple of personal disciple of Ānanda. This is mentioned. There's an account of the second council, and it is mentioned the leader of the second council, Venerable Sabakami. He still shared the dwelling with Venerable Ānanda, so he was still living together with Venerable Ānanda. Yeah, so this was my tribute to Venerable Ānanda, the great treasurer of the Dhamma. And so maybe I just finish with a few short verses of the senior monks of the second council that they added to Venerable Ānanda's Therigatha verses, and then his last Therigatha verses. Of great learning and expert of the Dhamma, the guardian of the treasure of the great sage, the eye of the entire world, Ānanda entered final Nibbana. Of great learning and expert of the Dhamma, the guardian of the treasure of the great sage, the eye of the entire world, was a dispeller of darkness. The sage who mastered the structure of the Dhamma, steadfast and mindful, the upholder of the true Dhamma, the elder Ānanda was a creator of gems. And then Venerable Ānanda, the teacher has been served for me. The Buddha's teaching has been done. The heavy burden has been put down. Now there is no further becoming.